Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to our first ComradeCast after the election night. And I obviously have to hold my hand up here and say, yes, I was absolutely wrong. I got my prediction wrong. What I thought was going to be the electoral map was absolutely not the case. We're going to talk a little bit about where I went wrong, the aftermath, and what happens from here. And overall, I am going to tell you guys that there has been a lot of doom and gloom on the left. I don't know why. I don't feel as doomy and gloomy as everybody else. Maybe because I'm hoping it might be time for a left-wing vision like mine to shine, because election night was absolutely a repudiation of the status quo neoliberalism. And as we've talked about a lot of times on this program before, is I hate the idea that left-wing people are attached to the ever diminishing and ever crumbling status quo. And I think with Kamala's loss, this is the time that we can finally say, we don't need you anymore. Your time is over. It's time for us to forge a new path. So let's take a look at the election results. One thing I have been waiting for eternally, apparently, is for the final vote tally. Here we are 2 weeks out from the election. We're going to jump over here to the Wikipedia page, which indicates that a total of almost 99% of the ballots are counted, 98.7%, and we are still waiting on California predominantly, because apparently every ballot in California is counted by an arthritic old man, because it is taking a freaking eternity. So let's look at our vote tallies here. Okay, so again, one of the reasons I've been wanting to wait for the final vote tally to come in is because a lot of people on election night were saying that Donald Trump is going to get less in terms of raw votes than he did in 2020. This is not the case. Currently, he has about 2.5 million more votes than he did in 2020. I'll just show you here, considering we're on Wikipedia. We have, in 2020, Donald Trump got 74 million votes. And then in 2024, Donald Trump has 76.6 million votes, so about 2.5 million more than he ended with in the last election cycle. But the big thing here, I think, more than a pretty marginal increase in the Republican vote, was the absolute cratering of the Democratic vote. In 2020, Joe Biden, as you can see, got 81 million votes, a very high number. And in 2024, Kamala Harris ends up with about the same number as Donald Trump got last time. She probably will almost end up with the exact same number of votes as Donald Trump in 2020. So she's got 74 million right now, and that is a huge loss. I typed it out here just so you guys can see. Obviously not super professional here, but we have currently, with almost 99% of the vote reporting, we have for the Republicans a almost 2.5 million vote increase, which is a 3.3% increase over 2020, whereas the Democrats lost 7.2 million votes, which is about a 8.8 or 9% decrease from 2020. So that is a huge, huge decrease. The Democrats, by and large, were not able to energize the turnout that they needed to win on election night. One thing that is clear, however, that once all the voting is done, it won't be as high of a turnout election as 2020. In fact, it will be a few percentage points short of what it was in 2020. And if Kamala Harris was able to energize the same amount of voters that Joe Biden was in 2020, she would have won this election, but she wasn't. And you can't hope to win an election when you lose more than 7 million voters. There's a couple reasons why I think she lost, but let's look at the electoral map. The only ones I got right were the ones that I guess the Republicans would win anyway, but they won every single swing state, making this a worse election for the Democrats. It's almost the exact same electoral college result that Hillary Clinton got, except for the fact that Hillary Clinton won Nevada in 2016. Kamala lost Nevada. She lost every single swing state. And I will say the one thing that was genuinely surprising to me on election night, because yes, I predicted that Kamala was going to win, but it wasn't like in 2016 where the idea that Donald Trump would win this election was completely improbable. I thought the chances of him winning election going to election day were around 40%. So a 40% result is not exactly surprising. What is surprising to me is the fact that he actually won the popular vote and looks like he will win the popular vote. Again, with the amount of ballots left to be counted, even though Kamala has steadily been increasing her percentage of the popular vote, it doesn't look like it's going to be enough, making Donald Trump the first Republican since 2004 in 20 years to win the popular vote. And honestly, it's an incredible achievement for a Republican, and one that I definitely didn't think he was going to be able to pull off. So to me, that is absolutely the most surprising result coming out of election night, that he actually was able to pull off a popular vote victory. So I want to talk a little bit about why Kamala lost, or at least why I think she lost. And of course, one of the things I definitely overestimated was the factor that abortion would play in this election. I thought that it would drive women voters out, but no, in fact, it was the boys who came out to vote on election night, not the gals. And one thing, actually, before I move on, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the discourse in the aftermath of this election that I find quite frustrating. For example, one of my Discord members shared a story that in the immediate aftermath of the election, after it became pretty clear that Donald Trump was going to win, his sister and mom phone him up and they say, "This is all your fault. This is the fault of men. Look at what you men did. This is all on you, blah, 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 blah." And of course, right, this is a guy who's a member of my Discord, right? He's like, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. This is absolutely not my fault. They didn't seem to care. And they apparently got into a pretty bad argument over this. And I remember being so frustrated after I heard this, because I was thinking, God, do these people want Republicans to win forever? Because as my Discord members said, it's precisely this kind of rhetoric that made a lot of young men feel victimized into voting for someone like Donald Trump, who expressly says that he will promote their interests. And this is another thing that I am, not surprised, and I don't really blame people for voting Donald Trump, because he came out and he said, "I'm going to make your life better." And I don't blame people for voting for that kind of message, because that's a winning message, no matter any politician that says it, right? And the Democrats were very clearly incapable of articulating that message, even though they had actual superior policy that would do much more to help people. They were not able to cut through the political discourse and actually communicate that to normal people. And that's on them, right? They obviously need to rethink their entire communication strategy, because their messaging just obviously isn't working. It's not getting through to people. Yeah, I definitely don't blame people who voted for the guy who said, "I'm going to make your life better," wanting to have a better life. Unfortunately, I think there's going to be a lot of rude awakenings in terms of this guy's not going to make people's lives better. And I think we're entering an era of extreme instability in the world. And with a guy like Donald Trump, he definitely does not add a amount of stability to the world's superpower. He, in fact, adds the opposite, right? He adds a little bit of chaos into the world order that is already fairly chaotic. In fact, I know someone who didn't vote for Trump this time, who's very close to me, but voted for Trump last time in 2020. Of course, I am talking about my wife, in fact, who voted for Donald Trump in the 2020 election, much to my chagrin. And she did this not necessarily out of like for Donald Trump, but more so out of a deep hatred for Joe Biden. In fact, I don't know anybody who hates Joe Biden more than my wife. And obviously, I think that if I were to lose my cool over my wife's preferred political candidate at that point, I think it's a pretty shitty thing to do. You have to be a pretty shitty person to walk down that road, at least in my opinion. And it's funny because I thought that she would be an accurate bellwether for this election, because now that Joe Biden is gone, she was very enthusiastic to vote for Kamala Harris. So I was thinking that this might be a feeling that was widespread amongst a lot of women in the United States. Not so much. And this is one of my political messages, is that the bar for cutting somebody out of your life for political reasons has to be extremely high, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not saying it's impossible. If you've got someone in your life and they're just goose-stepping around the living room constantly, I get it, right? But just because somebody voted for a political party you don't like, that's not a reason to cut them out of your life. And I think that anybody who ever espouses that kind of message, that's cult shit, when you're telling people you can't associate with this kind of person. because of what they believe. And I definitely think that more left-wing people should be out there trying to position themselves in right-wing spaces and making their arguments, because it is baffling to me as someone who is surrounded by a lot of right-wing people on a very regular basis, how little they actually understand about left-wing people and left-wing ideology and what we actually want and what we actually want to achieve. Part of the reason is because we're not vocal. We're not in their lives anymore. We're not making the arguments anymore. We're making the arguments more to our own internal spheres of influence. And I do want to say that this is not something that is exclusive to the left. You are actually seeing this happen more and more on the right, where you are seeing right-wing influencers and commenters basically saying that you should cast away all left-wing people in your lives. There's no reason to ever associate with a left-wing person or talk to them or anything like that. And of course, they are just doing the exact same things that they used to criticize other left-wing people of doing. Obviously, it's very hypocritical. And no matter what side of the political spectrum this kind of discourse comes out of, I absolutely condemn it. And this is something that I am definitely trying to put my money where my mouth is here a little bit more, because I am trying to get out there and be in more, I guess, kind of combative arenas to try and find areas where I can debate people or platform my political philosophies outside of this podcast zone or YouTube channel zone. So look forward to that coming in the future. But quickly, I want to move into some of the reasons why I think Kamala lost, even though by and large, I actually think she ran a very good campaign. Particularly, she ran a much better campaign than Hillary Clinton in 2016, who, in my opinion, ran probably the worst presidential campaign of my entire life. And it's going to be tough to see someone run a worse campaign than her. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, she had good messaging. She had a strong team, lots of fundraisers, lots of enthusiasm. And she was out there, right? She was out there holding rallies constantly. She wasn't like, I remember one of the big themes of Hillary Clinton's campaign is she was like always in her jet flying above the voters and everything like that. Kamala wasn't like that, right? She was holding rallies. She was out there. The big thing she definitely didn't do, I think, enough of was interviews in terms of more alternative media outlets, right? She did a couple mainstream media interviews and they weren't great, but the Democrats have that sphere locked down. So she needs to reach out, or she needed to reach out. And that was definitely one of the big complaints of her campaign. It's definitely strange looking back, because there was a lot of good indications for Kamala going into the election. One of the things we talked, of course, was the Ann Seltzer poll, who, in fact, it was Ann who ended up having her nips blown off, not everybody else. She missed the mark by an unbelievable 16 points. Talk about shredding your credibility. I've never seen a poll miss by that kind of margin. That's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible, especially for a pollster that had such a solid track record going into this election. We have definitely a 3 strikes you're out rule happening here, where I think polling is officially dead. I am trying to, and I know it's difficult not to fall into that siren song of analyzing the poll numbers, because sometimes in a lot of ways it feels like, especially if you're a political junkie like me, this is the only data you have and you want to like pour over it and try and figure out what the hell is going on. So I'm making an active note to myself to try and resist the siren song of the polling numbers, because it's pretty clear. We've had 3 election cycles in a row where polling consistently underestimated Donald Trump. Yes, there have been periods in American history where polling has actually been worse, but we've never had this kind of discrepancy so many times in a row. So it's unprecedented in that sense. And the thing is, the pollsters have actually been actively trying to adjust their methodology to account for this new polling landscape. And somehow they're ending up getting it worse every time. They're missing it more every time. So polls are dead. If Donald Trump wanted to actually do something good in his tenure in office, he could do something like what certain other countries do, which is they outlaw polling in about a month or 2 before the election. Obviously, before the election, people are allowed to poll as much as they want during election periods. But once the campaign starts, or it's a month out before the campaign ends, all poll results are outlawed and everybody goes in blind. And I've always really liked that law. And I think that that helps, not just because the main reason people would do this is because they wanted to make it not try to influence anybody's vote, in the sense that there's this idea or this want for people to want to vote for a winner. So if they look at the polls and they see someone winning consistently, there might be people who are moved to vote for them just to win. This was the main reason to get rid of that. But I think that just getting rid of that before the election would just not stress everybody out so much. It would be a lot less stressful to not have any idea what's going to happen going into the election, right? To not actually have polling data. Of course, candidates can do internal polls all they want. They just can't release them to the public. So they can do it themselves and try and figure out what the hell's going on in terms of their own political map. But in terms of releasing poll results, I really hope it's totally not going to happen, though, that the United States will follow in the footsteps of some of these other countries and ban polling results a certain period before the election. Let's talk a little bit about why I think Kamala lost. And one thing that was definitely overplayed was the issue of abortion. I guess it seems that one of the things that I thought after Roe v. Wade was overturned is that it would yield a fundamental shift in the political landscape of America, at least with this election that has not materialized. And one of the big things for Democrats is when they actually broke down the abortion vote by issue, the pro-abortion people were 100% in Trump's camp, basically. There was almost no deviation. But the pro-choice people, there was actually a considerable amount of deviation in their vote. There was maybe most of them went to Kamala, like 60% of them went to Kamala, but still 40% of that pro-choice vote ends up going to Donald Trump, which is pretty devastating for the Democrats when you're trying to run on this issue and make it such a central part of your political platform. You need to have 100% of the pro-choice people voting for your party. But it seems that dominantly the thing that overran this abortion consideration was economic issues. And that's something that I definitely underestimated, was how the economic pain in the United States would end up driving people's votes. One of the more incredible people that I've seen blamed for this election loss is Bernie Sanders. I've seen Bernie Sanders blamed because he didn't do enough to campaign and he didn't do enough to encourage more progressive leaning people to come out and vote. And this thesis runs contrary to what other people have been saying and postulating as a reason for the Democratic defeat, was that they were too quote unquote woke, right? They leaned too much into these kind of gendered issues. But the thing is, I didn't really feel that a lot from the Democratic campaign in 2024. In fact, if you guys go back to 2020, and originally I thought that Kamala Harris had run a more progressive campaign than Joe Biden. But as I thought about this more and more and started looking back into the things that were proposed, and not to mention like the time that 2020 took place, absolutely Joe Biden ran a more progressive and quote unquote woke campaign than Kamala Harris did in 2024. Kamala Harris was out there championing the fact that she had been endorsed by Liz and Dick Cheney. This to me is probably one of the biggest reasons why she lost the election, was leaning into this kind of bullshit, to these kind of neocon Republicans that nobody likes, that nobody wants, and ultimately showing that she wasn't a force for change at all, that she was a force for the status quo. I think Kamala got pigeonholed into being more progressive than she actually was because she was a woman of color running for president. I happen to have had stuff like that happen to me, that people think that I'm right-leaning because I'm a white guy. Definitely not the case. So I think because of that, she got perceived as more progressive than she actually was. No, absolutely. I do not think that Kamala ran a campaign that was quote unquote too woke, especially because in 2020, the Democrats ran a woker campaign and won, and they abandoned a lot of their more left-wing principles in this election around things like immigration, around things like economic issues. And this is something that has been highlighted by a lot of people, that the Democrats actually ran a lot of Republican sounding ads in the election. And this is a failed political strategy every time it happens. Every time you have a party that tries to run as a light version of its opposition, it always loses. And this has happened on both the left and the right. I've seen conservative parties try and run as a socialist light or liberal light kind of party. They get devastated. And then you see more left-leaning parties run as like a conservative light type of party. They get completely devastated. It turns out that when political parties stand on actual values and stand for something, people respond to that and they resonate with that. Do you guys remember the DNC nomination party, the DNC convention in 2020 versus 2024? In 2020, it was a woke fest, right? It was coming right out of the George Floyd protests and everything like that. Black Lives Matter and police brutality were a huge central piece of that DNC. This time, however, it was all about bringing on Republicans that said, we don't like Trump and we're voting Democrat this time because Kamala seems more moderate. And it was a good party and everything, but it certainly wasn't woke, especially in comparison to what they did last election cycle. But ultimately, I think this election is more so a defeat for the Democrats than a victory for Donald Trump and the Republicans. When we look at our raw vote tallies, Democrats lost a huge amount of voters. And there's a reason for that. It's because people are sick of the status quo and they no longer want to support a party who amplifies the status quo. So ultimately, I really do think that this is the end of the neoliberal establishment. It's pretty clear that Joe Biden was a mistake. Joe Biden shouldn't have won in 2020. And basically the only reason he won is because it was an extreme moment during a crisis. And it was pretty clear that Donald Trump was not up to managing that crisis. But now that the crisis is over, he looks a lot better. Looks a lot better in comparison. But one of the things I said on stream on the election night is that elections that end in a zero are always weird. Something weird happens. They're always like particularly close, or some kind of wacky event happens, or there's something incredible going on in the world. Of course, in 2020, we had a incumbent president be defeated, which is very rare. And not only that, it was an election that happened during a pandemic, which is a once in a lifetime thing. In 2020, we had the closest election, I think maybe ever, between Al Bush. That should be the president. They should have merged together because it was so close to become a super president. But anyway, between Al Gore and George Bush, that was, of course, the Florida recount, the one where Al Gore conceded, then took it back, right? Total clusterfuck. 1980 was, of course, another election where an incumbent president was defeated. Jimmy Carter was defeated by Ronald Reagan. 1960, of course, you have the probably second closest election. That was JFK versus Nixon. And then you go back to 1940, and that's FDR's third term, the only third term that any president has ever served so far. We hope that'll be the only third term president. I personally can't see a path for Donald Trump to run for a third term. I don't know if he wanted to exactly, like logistically what he could do. I guess he could escalate to the Supreme Court. I think it would be pretty politically difficult to do. We'll see, but I would consider it, well, not impossible, extremely unlikely that Donald Trump tries to finagle himself into a third term. And with that, this will be, I think, the first time since the Civil War that America has had 3 one-term presidents in a row. Definitely not showing the same kind of stability that the United States usually does in its political system. So ultimately, I think Kamala lost due to her marriage to the status quo. She wasn't able to define herself away from Joe Biden and away from the neoliberal status quo in a way that energized people. And it was pretty clear that the hand she was also dealt with was worse than we initially knew. We had Joe Biden, apparently his internal polling was showing a 400 electoral vote win for Trump, which is absolutely crazy in modern times. So if anything, I guess Kamala stopped the bleeding, but she wasn't able to play her bad hand very well. So where does this leave us all into the future? Ultimately, this leaves us in a place for the left, which is, I think, both good and bad. good in the sense that we can finally acknowledge that the status quo has failed. We don't have to spend any time defending it or doing this harm reduction like, oh, the status quo is at least better than Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump's fucking here now. Status quo didn't save us. Status quo is dead. Status quo is useless. It's time for a real, radical, revolutionary vision of the future. It's time to absolutely rethink what it means to be a left-wing person now. And I think in many ways go back to our roots. And our roots are defending and uplifting the working class. They always have been. And for us to be successful, they will always need to be. And we lost touch with the working class because a lot of left-wing people got shackled to the status quo which has done an extreme amount of damage to working people and has been unable to alleviate the pain in any meaningful capacity. So what exactly does the vision of the future look like for the left? Well, I definitely want to paint it red, but what exactly does that mean? Well, I think we have some time as left-wing people to examine the principles that we want to stand on and how we communicate those principles. We have time to distill our message in a way that is powerful, simple, and compelling to people, and come up with some meaningful solutions for how we're going to alleviate pain in people's lives. And I think it's time we recognize that the only way we can alleviate that pain is through real radical transformation of the system. So status quo liberals, you had it your way. Now it's our turn. It's time to let the adults drive the bus. And we are now going to define the future of what left-wing movements really mean for not just America, for the entire world. Because neoliberalism is dead. It has been dying a very slow, painful death for quite some time. And it's pretty clear now that there's no going back. The only way we have now is forward. And with that, I want to thank you guys for watching. This has been the Comrade. And sorry I had a rambling episode here. I had a lot of different thoughts in my head, and it was tough to organize them. It tends to happen after I don't record for a little while. I hope you forgive that, but we'll be back with the holiday season incoming. And now that we've had the major political points out of the way, as I've said before, I want to spend some time focusing on more cultural topics, more theoretical topics, and less in terms of the hard nitty-gritty politics, because we've been doing that for a while. Election year is always very focused on American election year, is always very focused on American politics. But now we can take some time and think about other things and think about some other topics and have some maybe more interesting conversations that lead to some outside the box thinking. So until then, this has been the Comrade signing off for now, and you guys take care.